Tonight we have a legend, a man who's been adored, vilified, and everything in between, Johnny Depp. But can he face the fire of 50 haters? Let's find out. The crowd erupted, a mix of cheers and jeers, and Johnny forced a lopsided smile, knowing this was no ordinary talk show. This was a crucible, and something big was coming. Something that would test him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Stick around, this story is worth it. Marcus didn't waste time. "Let's get started," he said, scanning the crowd with theatrical flair. "You, sir, in the gray shirt. What do you want to say to Johnny Depp?" A burly man in his 40s stood, his face etched with disdain. "Johnny, is it easier to blame it all on a woman than to admit you trashed your own life with booze and coke?" The question landed like a punch, and the audience gasped, a few clapping in approval. Johnny leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly, but his voice stayed steady, that familiar drawl carrying a hint of defiance. "Look, I've never been one to dodge my mistakes. I've had my struggles, plenty of them, but pinning it on someone else? That's not my style. I own what I've done, and I've paid for it, believe me." His words were measured, sincere enough to quiet the room. But before he could settle back, another voice cut through. A woman in a red jacket, unprompted, standing up with fire in her eyes. "That's a nice story, Johnny, but didn't you admit to blowing millions on drugs in court? How's that owning it?" The crowd stirred, a low murmur rippling through. Johnny's jaw tightened, caught off guard by the follow-up, but he leaned into the mic. "Numbers get thrown around, exaggerated. I've lived large, sure, but I'm still here, still working, still creating. You think I'd be sitting here if I didn't have something left to give?" It was a dodge, not quite an answer, and the woman sat down, unimpressed, as Marcus smirked and moved on. The host's eyes scanned the crowd again. "You, in the blue cap? What's your question?" A young man, barely out of his 20s, stood, his voice trembling with a mix of nerves and anger. "How does it feel to play a pirate, Johnny, and then in real life steal the hero kids looked up to?" The accusation hit differently, slicing into something deeper. Johnny's smile faltered, and he adjusted his posture, leaning forward as if to physically push back. "That's not true," he said firmly, his voice carrying a rare edge. "I've given everything to those roles, to the fans, especially the kids. I've visited hospitals, spent hours in character for them. Jack Sparrow's theirs, always will be." The audience was split, some nodding in agreement, others skeptical, and then a shout from the back pierced the tension. "What about the stories of you showing up drunk to those visits? That's not a hero." Johnny's eyes darted toward the voice, but he couldn't see the source. "Fake," he said, his tone resolute but strained. "People love to twist things, make a mess of the truth. I've never let those kids down." He held the crowd's gaze, daring them to challenge him, but the air felt heavier now, the weight of doubt settling in. Marcus, sensing the rising tension, clapped his hands. "All right, let's keep this moving. You, ma'am, in the green scarf, what do you have for Johnny?" A middle-aged woman stood, her expression calm but piercing. "Is it true you were spending $30,000 a month on wine alone? And you expect us to feel sorry for you?" The crowd erupted again, some laughing, others shouting in agreement. Johnny's lips curled into a wry smile, but his eyes didn't match it. He leaned back, crossing his arms, and let out a low chuckle that didn't quite hide the sting. "You know, when you're living a certain way, numbers like that get tossed around, and they sound wild out of context. Was I extravagant? Sure. Do I want your pity? Not a chance. I'm here because I'm still standing, and that's more than a lot of people expected." His defiance sparked a reaction. Some in the crowd clapped, but the woman in the scarf shook her head, unconvinced, and a man nearby stood without being called. "Standing? You call dodging accountability standing? You're a joke!" The words hit hard, and Johnny's smile vanished. He opened his mouth to respond, but another voice joined in, then another, a chorus of accusations piling on, about his spending, his lifestyle, his choices. The studio felt like it was closing in, the lights too bright, the voices too loud. Johnny's fingers gripped the armrest, his cool facade cracking just enough for the camera to catch it. The accusations had already cut deeper than he'd prepared for, each question a jab at the carefully rebuilt image he'd been crafting since his legal battles ended. His fingers, still gripping the armrest, betrayed the strain behind his practiced nonchalance. Marcus Reed, the host, reveled in the chaos, his eyes gleaming as he scanned the audience for the next spark to ignite. "All right, folks, let's not get too comfortable," Marcus said, his voice dripping with mock civility. "You, sir, in the black hoodie, what's your question for Johnny?" A lanky man in his 30s stood, his posture slouched, but his tone sharp. "You won your court case, Johnny. But did you win respect? Or did that die back in 2016 when the world started seeing who you really are?" The question landed like a blade, slicing through the room's fragile equilibrium. Johnny's eyes flickered with something raw. Anger, maybe, or hurt. But he leaned into the mic, his voice low and deliberate. "Respect's a funny thing," he said, pausing to let the words sink in. "You don't win it in a courtroom. You earn it by showing up, by keeping going, even when half the world's decided you're done. I'm still here, still making art, still fighting. That's my answer." The crowd was quieter now, some nodding, others unconvinced. But before Johnny could catch his breath, another voice, a woman in a navy blazer standing without being called, cut in. "The court cleared you on paper, Johnny, but not in the eyes of everyone who saw the dirt you left behind." The accusation hung heavy, and the crowd erupted in murmurs. Johnny's jaw clenched, but he forced a tight smile. "Dirt gets thrown when you're in the spotlight. I've made mistakes, owned them, and moved on. The court's not my judge. Neither are you. I sleep fine knowing I told my truth." His words were firm, almost convincing, but the woman's stare didn't waver, and the room felt like it was teetering on the edge of something bigger. "Stay with it. This story's got more to unravel." Marcus, sensing the mounting tension, stepped in to diffuse the moment, his grin never faltering. "Let's keep it civil, folks. We've got plenty more to unpack. You, in the yellow sweater, what do you have for our guest?" A woman in her late 40s stood, her voice calm but laced with venom. "Johnny, you've played all these quirky, lovable characters, but how do you live with knowing your real-life drama overshadows everything you've built?" Johnny's fingers stopped tapping, his hands now still, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity. "My work's always been my anchor," he said, his voice softer now, almost introspective. "The drama? It's noise. It sells papers, gets clicks, but it doesn't define me. The characters I play, the stories I tell, that's what lasts." His answer drew a few claps, but the woman wasn't done. "Noise? You call dragging your ex through the mud noise? You think that's what artists do?" The crowd stirred again, and Johnny's composure wavered, his eyes darting to Marcus as if expecting rescue. But Marcus only raised an eyebrow, letting the moment simmer. Another man, unprompted, shouted from the back, "Yeah, Johnny, you're no artist. You're a tabloid headline." The room exploded in a mix of boos and cheers, and Johnny's face tightened, his cool exterior cracking further. He opened his mouth, but Marcus raised a hand, his voice cutting through. All right, let's not turn this into a circus. Johnny's here to answer, so let's give him a chance." The crowd settled, but the air was electric, every eye locked on Johnny, waiting for him to falter or fight back. The show pressed on, each question sharper than the last. A young woman in a denim jacket stood next, her voice trembling but resolute. "You talk about art, but what about the people who believed in you and got let down? The fans who defended you, only to see more stories about your meltdowns?" Johnny's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the night settling in. "I never wanted to let anyone down," he said, his voice quieter now, almost raw. "I'm human. I've stumbled, fallen, picked myself up. The fans who stuck by me, they know I'm not perfect, but I'm real. I give what I've got, and I'm grateful for them." His sincerity softened some in the crowd, but not all. A man in a plaid shirt stood without being called, his voice booming. "Real? You're a multimillionaire whining about your problems while the rest of us scrape by. You don't get to play the victim." The crowd roared, and Johnny's eyes darkened, his fingers curling into fists. "I'm not whining," he shot back, his voice rising for the first time. "I've never asked for anyone's sympathy. I fought for everything I have, and I'm still fighting. You think you know me because you read some headlines? You don't. The room was a powder keg now, and Marcus, ever the showman, let it burn, his silence amplifying the tension. As the show barreled toward its climax, Marcus called on one final questioner, a woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. "Johnny," she said, her voice steady but piercing. "You've spent years building this larger-than-life persona, but when you look in the mirror, do you like the man you see? Or is he just another role you're playing?" The question landed like a quiet bomb, stripping away the noise of the previous accusations. The crowd fell silent, every eye on Johnny. He leaned back, his face unreadable for a moment, then rubbed his jaw, his rings glinting under the lights. "That's the real question, isn't it?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some days I like him, some days I don't. But he's me. Flaws, scars, all of it. I don't hide from him, and I don't play him. I live him." The room was still, the weight of his words sinking in. Even Marcus seemed caught off guard, his usual quips absent. The woman nodded, sitting down without another word, and the crowd's energy shifted, a mix of respect and unease rippling through. No one shouted this time, no one pushed further. The moment felt final, like a door closing on something unspoken. As the show wrapped, Marcus took center stage, his voice booming with artificial cheer. "Well, folks, that was one for the books. Johnny Depp faced the fire, and you saw it all, raw, real, and unfiltered. Give it up for him." The crowd's applause was mixed, some enthusiastic, others tepid, but the cameras caught every angle, every reaction. Johnny stood, offering a small wave, his face a mask of exhaustion and defiance. Backstage, as the crew scrambled and the audience filed out, the show's producers were already buzzing about the ratings. The numbers were through the roof, social media exploding with clips and hot takes. Johnny, however, slipped out a side exit, avoiding the press, his head down as he lit a cigarette. The night had been a gauntlet, each question a mirror held up to his life, forcing him to confront pieces of himself he'd long buried. He'd answered as best he could, but the weight of those final words lingered. Did he like the man in the mirror? He wasn't sure. As he disappeared into the night, the question hung unanswered, a quiet challenge he'd carry long after the camera stopped rolling.